Hi guys, my name is Joanna, and today I wanted to talk about something that I have not only experienced in my own life, but I've seen actually in the lives of the people that I work with. In the spiritual community, this is often labeled a quote-unquote timeline shift. So if you're wondering what that means, or likely you have actually had these experiences, what timeline shifts feel like is typically it starts to happen when we feel like we're almost losing a sense of everything that we have. So where I see this generally pop up for people is like if they are just sort of in this really big transitional time in life. So I see it happen when people leave significant relationships, long-term ones, divorce, if they are really considering a huge professional shift, whether it's changing a job, but most often a whole job industry, like going from one field to another. Big moves, so like moving from one place to another and leaving all that's familiar behind. Or generating a new outlet, so really looking at starting a business or some really creative outlet that has a really big draw. And the reason this is important is timeline shifts happen for a reason. Generally, we start to note this when we are really veering towards the path that we need to. We can feel the draw. The struggle is that they're extremely scary for many people. So they sometimes require such significant life changes that we feel like we're losing everything that we have. We feel like our life sometimes is actually falling apart. And in some regards, there's a closing to that life that we know, but it isn't necessarily falling apart for no purpose. Generally, it's kind of coming to an end and we're starting a new beginning, a new cycle. But it's scary. So a lot of people face these huge pivotal moments in life and really are terrified. It's often when I see them seek out not only counseling, but it's pretty common for them to start seeking guidance from friends, family, and even spiritual people. So it's not uncommon that for those who don't even necessarily practice intuition development, might even seek out a psychic just to get some input or a reading of what's going to happen, because the fear is usually so high that something negative is going to happen with this change. We're afraid of the unknown more than we are of the familiar. Even if the familiar is negative, there's a sense of safety in that predictability, and the unknown really challenges us. We get really frightened and tend to get into kind of these worry loops and catastrophize. So it's not uncommon that we're facing a really positive change, but before that is proven to us that we're really scared and we're projecting ahead and really terrified about all the what ifs and all the potential negatives that could but unlikely follow these changes. So timeline shifts usually are accompanied by a sense of loss, and then a sense of renewal, excitement, and rebuilding. And the rebuilding is really the important part. We're really starting to align with where we're needing to go and what we're needing to do. So once we get through the fear, once we get through kind of what I call the tunnel, where sometimes during these shifts, even though on an instinctive level you know that it's likely going to benefit you, but on a cognitive and emotional level you're stressed to the max. It can feel like you're going through a dark tunnel. You can feel really lost, you can feel really disconnected and disoriented and not really sure where you're headed. And so sometimes it's hard to just surrender to this process. Again, even with the intuitive sense that this is leading you to the light, to the thing that you want most, it can be really hard to let go when we're in that tunnel phase, before that full transition has happened. I liken it sometimes to actually being against a cliff and having to jump. You know, it's like the expression, jump and the net will appear. Sometimes we do these blind leaps of faith into this abyss that we don't even know what's on the other end, with this fear that of course we won't survive this leap. But generally when we're pushed like this and nudged, it's to serve our greater purpose and the purpose, a sense of purpose for the collective whole, but more than anything to serve a greater purpose. It's really a way to kind of steer course and put us in alignment, but it doesn't feel good. So we don't always necessarily have inherent trust that it's all going to work out, though. For every single person that I have seen and witnessed go through this, it always does. It always ends up leading to something else that brings in so much joy and so much happiness that later, when in that space, people actually reflect back and are grateful that it happened. But while in the moment of experiencing these shifts, people don't necessarily have that gratitude for the experience. They're really lost, they're really frightened, and really looking for a reassurance of what, like I said, they already inherently know, but what they're kind of getting stuck in the head with as far as what the changes will be and how it might pan out. So my guess is for most people, if you're watching this video, you've likely had this experience already. We go through many in our lives. You probably have had the experience of doing this and then coming out on the other end in a way you never thought possible, but really starting to realize that these are big growth periods. These are shifts that happen on so many levels, and we really start to grow and develop as holistic beings. So not only on a personal level, an emotional level, spiritual level, but our whole life starts to shift around these pivotal moments. And after you've gone through a few, I wouldn't say it gets easier, but you trust the process even if you don't understand it in the moment. Like, there's an increased ability to surrender. And so if you are in this space and you are looking or to shift, if you are feeling nudged, if you are being encouraged, and I've seen all different ways that we're encouraged, whether it be through dreams, through signs, symbols, anything, usually because we're so frightened in these moments, but these shifts are really steering course to where we truly want and need to be. It's not uncommon that a lot of people get a lot of kind of intuitive signaling to head that way, that despite their fear that yes, this is the path to go, and to kind of bump and plod us along so we can move and not get kind of stuck in what we're, again, familiar with but isn't necessarily always serving our purpose. So if you are at present time really looking at jumping, if you are at a point where you know you're about to do a huge timeline shift, what I really encourage you to do is try to harness the power of your thoughts. Really refocus on the positives. It's easy to get lost in despair. It's easy to let the rational brain kind of deter us into fear and worries, and it doesn't serve any purpose to loop in there. It's normal to do it. The brain's going to try to do it, but if you catch yourself doing that, like, really try to go into your heart resonance and really go into that sense of knowing that this is the direction. Sometimes developing a motto or a mantra of just reassurance can be really helpful. So my personal one that I use when I'm struggling is that I say to myself, I trust in my higher self to provide all that I need. And I just kind of imagining like a surrendering, a letting go, and a trust that I'll be led. I don't need to problem solve everything. I don't need to figure it all out. I will get nudges, and when things start to align, I feel really happy and excited. Like I can have the great sense that things are kind of unfolding before me and helping me to just sort of walk the road. I'm not having to, create this path through hard work. It just sort of unfolds. The hard work is learning to manage the angst and the uncertainty and the fears related to the process and let the rest happen. And then I notice too myself getting lost in the worry loops, and I can feel that the emotions are signals. Like, I'll get into a really anxious, agitated space, and if I pay attention to what I'm thinking or what I'm focusing my thoughts on, I can note this tendency to feel again like I need to manage, that I need to predict, I need to problem solve, I need to have 1,001 versions of what ifs and plans of action for each potential one. to feel quote unquote prepared, but generally none of these ever arise, and a whole different version we never anticipated does. So we never even came up with a problem plan of action for that, because we never even thought of it. So we can spend a lot of time and energy in this worry loops that just don't serve us, and can kind of derail us from the shift that's needed, and just make it a way more intensive process than what it already is. So even with management of our feelings, with doing a lot of kind of self-care, maybe meditation, or just maybe again refocusing our attention to the things that bring us joy, happiness, and peace, we can still feel an angst. Again, there is a letting go that's involved, and sometimes with timeline shifts we are closing out a lot of patterns. And so it could be patterns of relationships, it could be patterns of being, like philosophies, or kind of relationships with food, money, materialistic stuff, industries, value systems, things like that. So generally we're coming to an end of a cycle with a timeline shift, and so we are closing down multiple ways of patterning that just don't serve us anymore. And there, again, in those moments can be a really great sense of loss. You might feel like relationships are fading away from you. You might feel like you're losing things that you weren't anticipating to lose in the process. And what I look at it is it's like life sort of sets the stage for you. It starts to kind of cut the cords, cut the connections to this past way of being, which is extremely painful, and it can be sad, and we can feel like we can feel grief, to be honest. You really can feel a lot of negative emotionality aside from fear when moving through these phases. And allow for that, allow for the expression. It's not a matter of having to change how you feel. Even with refocusing, you're not telling yourself you can't feel bad. You're just inherently understanding that staying in a negative emotional state for a long time isn't going to serve your purpose. But the negative emotions are valid. The worry and the sadness and the grief and the loss, all of that is normal and valid, and we can honor that, and we can allow for the expression of that, and just kind of sit in that space temporarily before we refocus or pivot into a different emotional state. And it's okay. And sometimes at best during these periods you might almost feel neutral, and that might be the best that you can feel, because there's just so much transition and so much what seems like chaos going around that you don't feel good. And you don't have to feel good. That's not the journey. The journey is to just make it through the transition, and sometimes these growth phases are really painful. It's like what I said in one of my prior videos is growth is hard. Growth hurts. It's not comfortable. And when we're in the throes of it, it's usually pretty intense and pretty awful. And we can emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually feel really drained, feel really tired, really fatigued, sick, all of this. And that isn't necessarily an omen of negative to come. It's just our preparation and our accommodation of new ways of being, and kind of a letting go of others. And so it's just a lot of change, and it can be overwhelming. There's a lot of energy involved. It can be really overwhelming to our systems, so it can feel really uncomfortable. But I invite you to, as much as possible, the goal in these transitions is to really try to trust you. Trust your intuition, even if the physical evidence, things aren't making sense to you. To have blind trust that you're being led and guided in the direction that's going to be helpful. It's not going to bring you to something that's worse. The terribles, the most extreme what ifs, that's not what's on the other side. It's always meant to bring you to a higher level. Yes, the change around that can be hard, and there can be loss involved, but it's always with the sense that the tunnel will end and you will emerge into the light, and it'll be a brighter and more beautiful path than the one you were on before, and that will yield more happiness. It's just you have to get through the transitional phase. So I hope that was helpful. I find that a lot of people talk about these shifts, and I just like to explain sometimes that despite them being really negative feeling in the moment, they usually yield very positives, and in retrospect, most people are thankful that they happened. It's just in the moment we're kind of blind and it doesn't feel good, and that's normal. And to know that with these shifts on the other side is usually big upgrades, big changes in our way of being, usually yielding more happiness, joy just in our day-to-day living, but also can accompany really big shifts and just sort of our energy and our spirituality, our intuition, our ability levels, things like that. So it's a progression. It's a constant evolution that we're going through, and there's a cycling, and this is part of the cycling where we're entering kind of a new cycle. So I thank you for your time. If you like the video, feel free to like it, and I'm wishing you the greatest day. Bye.